This week on the Steele Report.
Only 2% of sexual violence that's committed in rural communities is ever reported to law enforcement. 2%.
Today, learn about the efforts of the Riverview Center locations helping survivors of sexual and domestic abuse. And our program begins right now.
Now from KWWL, this is the Steele Report.
Right now, I'd like to welcome to the Steele Report for the very first time the executive director of the very well-known Riverview Center, serving really, Gwen, 16 counties, yes. 14 in Iowa, a couple of Illinois, and Gwen is the executive director the last couple of years. Well, let's begin real first of all, though. We were just talking a little bit before we started taping. Some people might not know exactly what Riverview Center does, but you help some individuals who are really in need of help because it involves sexual violence. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so Riverview Center provides crisis and long-term support services for survivors of sexual violence here in Iowa in 14 counties, and those who experience sexual or domestic violence in 2 counties in Illinois. We provide crisis response, general advocacy, medical, legal advocacy, therapy, and counseling services, violence prevention, education, and community awareness. And all of our services are 100% free and 100% confidential.
Well, that's I was going to say, confidentiality must be such a critical part of what you do. What does it take for, particularly, I suppose, mostly you're talking about women, probably 99% or even maybe even more. What does it take for a woman to come to you and seek your services? There's still a stigma out there that you're trying to get over, just like with mental health. Right. So how do you address that, and what can you do for them?
Sure, so that's the number one reason why people don't come forward is that stigma, the shame that people experience. And while certainly the majority of people that we serve are women, we also serve children who've been subjected to sexual abuse, as well as men. People would be surprised the number of men who come forward, particularly with our services being confidential. A lot of men feel comfortable coming forward to talk to us in ways they maybe wouldn't even to their own partner or their family members. So what somebody needs to do to come receive services and support from us is simply just reach out to us. They don't need to have reported to law enforcement. They don't need to have disclosed to anyone else. In fact, for a lot of survivors coming and telling us their story, it's the first time they've ever shared their story with anybody, and sometimes we're the only people that ever know.
And a lot of women are looking to get out of an abusive relationship. That's difficult to do.
It is.
And then, like you say, trying to overcome just the obstacle of coming to you and saying, I need help, this happened to me, what can you do for me? So let's say someone comes to your office, what are you going to do for them?
So when they come in, certainly they meet with one of our very specially trained, well-trained advocates who will sit down and listen to what the survivor wants to tell us. Our services are survivor-centered, so they tell us what they want to work on. We don't diagnose, we don't prescribe, we listen to them and they tell us what they need, and then we go from there. It's interesting because sometimes we don't even know the full story, but they tell us they're struggling with sleep, they're struggling with crowds, they're struggling with trying to get out of their home, they're struggling with dealing with family members who don't understand, and we will sit with them and work with them, problem solve, provide them support, role play. We'll provide them peer counseling to give them coping strategies to deal with anxiety or depression, anything that survivors need. We've done everything from intensive therapeutic services to helping someone go to the grocery store for the first time who couldn't even get out of their home after an event. So anything that they need, we will do for them.
Yeah, you're talking about some of the amazing collateral damage that goes along with this, and you mentioned family members who might not even believe the story.
Correct, they don't believe, and particularly we serve a lot of children who've been survivors of sexual abuse, and 90+% of children that are sexually abused are abused by someone they know, love, and trust. So it's often a family member or a very trusted friend, a neighbor, an uncle, and oftentimes even adults will come to us 50 years later and say, I've struggled my whole life because my mother never believed me. And we help them figure out how to thrive beyond acknowledging the harm that was done to them and creating the life that they want to live beyond that trauma.
Yeah, some of the statistics are really startling. You have a new grant, though, of $700,000, which is going to be addressed mainly toward the rural community, right?
Right.
Because tell us that amazing stat that we were talking about with the FBI.
Yeah, so according to the FBI uniform crime statistics, only 2% of sexual violence that's committed in rural communities is ever reported to law enforcement. 2%, and that's from the FBI themselves. So we know that even though it's very difficult to come forward and report having been sexually assaulted or being abused by a partner, we know that more than 2% would like to seek justice and do just that. So this grant, $700,000 from the Office of Violence Against Women over 3 years, will allow us to dig in even more into these rural communities that we already serve. 13 of our 16 counties are considered rural counties. So it's work we're already doing, but we know that there's so much more. There's so many more survivors out there who, because of the nature of the offense, are in sort of a collusive relationship with their abuser. They and the abuser are the only ones who know what happened. And by us getting to more survivors and helping them thrive more beyond their trauma, we'll shake them of that secret that they share with their perpetrator and help them create the life that they want to live beyond. And I knew that this was something I want to do, really to give voice to people out there who've been harmed, who so often are shamed, they're not believed, and they live with this trauma on their back that impedes their ability to create relationships, to hold a job, to live a happy life that we all deserve to live.
And you know this from your own research and what you've been doing in many, many years. A lot of victims do not realize what they are carrying, how it's impacting their lives on a daily basis, right? This kind of, you can open their eyes, right?
We can open their eyes, and a lot of times, in fact, someone will come to us and let's say it's a young woman, and she'll come to us and she'll say, you know, this happened to me. I don't even know if this really was an assault. I don't even know if this was really, you know, I went on the date with him. I got in the car with him. I invited him into my home, and because of all of those things, she takes on a level of blame herself.
Right.
So she doesn't even know if she even has the right to say she's a victim. So we can sit there, and we never tell them they are. We just kind of walk through the process with them until they realize, wow, something was done to me that I didn't consent to, and I've been harmed. And then we start peeling back the layers of all the ways in which it's affecting them. But more importantly, we start opening up the doors to all the ways that they can overcome it. So.
And even if you say to them, it's not your fault, it might take months for them to actually understand that, right?
Oh, sometimes there's a light bulb moment where a woman, I remember, I was speaking with a woman, and she's like, I couldn't decide anything. I couldn't make any decisions. I couldn't decide what to do for dinner. I couldn't decide if I wanted a new job. I couldn't decide anything. And she said, one day I just woke up and I was like, wait a minute, I'm acting like I have no power. Like, the power to trust myself was taken away, and now I'm working to get that back.
Yeah, a part of you is stolen.
A part of you is stolen. And your ability to know who to trust yourself or to trust others is taken from you. And, you know, it takes a lot to build trust. It's pretty easy to destroy, but it takes a lot to build, and we work a lot with that with our survivors.
Yeah, I've learned that over the years with some of the kids I've worked with who are in the foster care system.
Oh.
Their trust issues are amazing.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult. What are you going to do with the $700,000? How can you put it into work?
Sure. So with the $700,000, again, it's over 3 years, we are able to add a rural advocate, which is most nonprofits will say the same thing. We never have enough staff. We look at some of our deeply rural communities, particularly between here and Cedar Rapids, up in the, Benton, Buchanan, those areas. We have been able to add a new advocate who will work specifically and deeply in those communities to build relationships with law enforcement and other community partners to really dig in and create awareness that we're there and that survivors can come to us for assistance. We also are adding another position who will become sort of the expert in providing services in rural communities. With only 2% coming forward, you have to ask yourself why. And a lot of it's because everybody in a small town knows each other, right? We worked with a woman who was a victim of domestic violence, and she said one time that the day that her husband beat her the worst, the EMT that came to her home was her former paperboy. And the judge who presided over her case was her next door neighbor. And it took everything in her power to come forward because of that familiarity. And knowing that so many of those people in the community then know her husband and didn't believe her, right? So getting somebody who understands the culture of rural communities and can help people really fortify themselves against sort of a lot of those barriers, like the familiarity or sort of the healthcare deserts that they have in some of these communities. There's no place to go to a doctor and say, I've been assaulted, like we have in our larger communities. You can go to the emergency room or whatnot. Really helping people find the resources that they need in these small communities that are often under-resourced to get the healing that they need.
How often do you work with the husband, or do you work with the families, and how often do the families end up splitting up because of what has happened, or how often do they stay together?
So we Historically, we have not worked, if you're talking about sort of the perpetrator, we have
Right.
not worked with the perpetrator.
Only the victims, okay.
However, as time has evolved, and something that we're finding in a lot of the coalitions that we work with is the population of people who are perpetrators purely and the population of people who are victims are more closely aligned than we think. A lot of perpetrators were victims themselves, both with domestic violence and with sexual violence. So we have expanded now. There are programs out there that we will refer perpetrators to if they come to us, particularly if they come to us not just as a perpetrator, but also they disclose that they also have been a victim in the past. We will definitely find them a place to get assistance as well. Our goal is to create a world without violence. That is our mission. So to do that, we can't turn our back on victims just because they also might be perpetrators. We know that the way to prevent future violence is to assist anybody who's been a victim and kind of break that cycle. So that we will always try to find some place for somebody to go, even if it's not us.
Okay, and what do you tell the women? Do you tell them you have to get away from them totally, or do you try to repair the marriage, or is that best left for a marriage counselor?
It's really up to the survivor. And I think that's the hardest thing, particularly when you're talking about domestic violence. That's the hardest thing for people to understand is a survivor will say, I want the violence to end, but I still love him and I want my family. And that's counterintuitive to maybe somebody who's not been in that situation. So the nuances of our work are putting what that survivor wants in the center and helping them create whatever life they want to live, while helping them find the resources they need to know that they could be on their own if that's what they eventually decide.
Yeah,
So we won't tell them one way or the other, but we will try to help them find what they need to know they have options.
Yeah, the dynamics of interpersonal relationships
Yeah.
is very, very complicated. And you mentioned it's kind of like the bully who was bullied and becomes the bully.
Yes.
It's a cycle that needs to be broken.
Right.
We're going to take a break here real quick with Gwen and come back and talk more about what Riverview is doing here and a big event. You'll have your big fundraiser, I assume,
We
coming
will.
up in the spring. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Steel Report this week. My guest is Gwen Bramlett-Hecker, the Executive Director of Riverview Center. We've been talking about all the things that you do to help the victims and survivors of sexual assault and violence, and I would assume that you're busy. Unfortunately.
Yes.
I mean, that
Yes.
is very troubling to me and so many other people.
Yes.
So moving forward, particularly the new grant you have for the rural area,
Yes.
how do you think this is going to help? Is it really going to make an impact right away, do you believe?
I think it will make an impact right away. You know, everything costs anymore, and everything costs more. And with this grant, for example, it will allow our advocates and our therapists to spend more time in these rural counties. That it pays for, literally pays for the gas to get them into these counties. It pays for the gas we use if we transport a survivor to a community partner. If they want to go report to law enforcement, we give them a ride. It really can, if they have special needs, if they're struggling with mental health counseling, if they're struggling with healthcare, substance use, mental health issues, all of these funds can be used to really develop the resources that our survivors need in these rural communities. And it also will help us raise awareness. One of the things that also happens in these rural communities is there's not as much media. And so it's very difficult for, nonprofits like mine, human services, victim services, to build the awareness that we're out there. And so with this grant too, we hope to be able to dig in more into these communities where people are. So the community centers, the libraries, places like that where people in these rural communities are, we can be there to provide some programming, some awareness building, maybe support groups, things that really center in these communities as opposed to expecting people from these communities to come to our larger cities, which is what often happens, in these smaller towns.
So do you have an office in all 14 of the Iowa counties, or do they need to go to Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, or?
So we have, in Iowa, we have offices in Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, and Decorah.
Okay.
We have a satellite office up in Alameda County as well, and we have an office on the UNI campus as well. One of the reasons why this grant is so important is because we know that survivors don't want to come to the cities. That's not what they want to do. And one of our values is meeting people where they're at, literally and figuratively, right? So this grant, it's what we do anyway, but this grant will allow us to do it even more. We spend time in these communities. Any of these communities, we try to go in and find space, confidential space, quiet space, space that is discreet. We have churches that will let us use an office. We've actually had a car dealership that allowed us to use an office in their back, someplace that somebody could discreetly come in. Like, we try to network with places where we can find quiet, discreet places so we can meet people where they live or where they're comfortable. Sometimes people like to go to a different community than where they live,
Right.
and so we'll find a space in a different community for them.
So
to
you're
use that.
telling me you'll actually go to the town. Obviously, you aren't going to be able to go to the home if the abuser is there. So
Right.
you're going to a place that's, like you say, you know, very, very discreet. You'll actually go to that community and
Absolutely.
if they call you. So make that call, and then you'll meet them at their place. Right?
Absolutely, that is our mandate, basically, is to be where they want us to be and to be there when they need us to be there. So.
Well, that is fantastic. How big a staff do you have? How many people work for Riverview?
So our total staff is about 40. We have 2 to 3 advocates in each of those offices, and then we have an office in Joe Daviess County in Galena, Illinois, as well as in Mount Carroll in Carroll County, Illinois as well, and we have 2 to 3 advocates there as well. Therapists. We're a small but mighty team. We're a very active team. We're also a 24/7, 365 agency. So when a survivor shows up at an emergency department in one of our hospitals and discloses that he or she has been sexually assaulted, we're often the first call that they make. And we dispatch an advocate to go to the hospital to be with that survivor during whatever they go through at that time, whether they go through the forensic kit, to collect evidence for their assault, whether they just want to talk, if they want law enforcement there, we're there with them during that entire time. And so we have staff on call 24/7, 365 to respond. So our staff, when you say we're busy, we are very busy, and we're busy every day of the year.
That's too bad. Yeah,
It is too bad.
It's very unfortunate, yeah. So let me ask you, the Me Too movement was going strong. Did that help raise awareness? And where is that movement right now
Sure.
as far as where you see it? You know?
I remember when it happened, I was not in my current role, I was in a different role with the agency, but I remember telling the staff, like, this is wonderful for us right now. This is wonderful to empower survivors to step up and say, you know, me too, which is what the whole movement was about. It wasn't about taking down powerful men. It was about empowering survivors to say me too and to know they weren't alone. But I remember also, giving them guidance that with that will also come the backlash. And we have, certainly over time it comes back and forth, but we have experienced certainly a backlash as well where, survivors are intimidated or are disbelieved or are very much discredited, with social media and whatnot. There's so many vehicles with which to discredit a human being, right? And so we see that with our survivors. But I think on measure, the Me Too movement was more helpful, certainly, in that we now talk about it on a show like this. Like it's out now of, so to speak, out of the closet, where there's much more of a cultural and social conversation that continues to occur about this work, and that can only help survivors feel normal coming forward and saying, me too, I've been harmed. We have kind of a motto in our agency of no wrong number. So, you can call one of our offices, and if you call an office that's not the office that you would talk to somebody, we'll get you there. If you want to go to the website, if you want to go to, our email addresses are all there. If you want to stop in one of the offices, our addresses are there, and our hotline numbers are there too. So if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you wake up and you have the courage to say something you've never said to anybody before, you can call the hotline and a trained advocate will answer. Yeah. So there's multiple ways to get a hold of us. The key is to do it, and our hope is that you only have to do it one time, and we'll be there for you.
Yeah, I noticed on your website that 24-hour assault survivor hotline is there. It's manned all the time. Right?
Yes, it is.
Let me ask you, you have a big fundraiser coming up on a 2-day period in the spring. You've always had some really powerful speakers come in. Allie Raisman last year, if I remember correctly. The Cleveland survivor came one time. So who do you have this year? What do you have planned this year and when it's going to be? Yeah.
So we are really excited this year. This particular speaker is somebody that, for those of us in our work, her disclosure and her powerful presence now in the world has meant the world to us. And our speaker this year is Chanel Miller. Chanel Miller is the survivor from the Brock Turner case. Some of you might remember Brock was the very celebrated diver at Stanford who was actually caught by tourists who just happened to be riding their bicycles by while Brock was sexually assaulting Chanel while she was unconscious behind a dumpster. And unfortunately, Brock Turner received a sentence of 6 months and served 4. Because the statement in court was, we didn't think it was right to ruin his life over one mistake. Chanel at the time was known as Emily Doe, and she wrote a powerful victim impact statement that I encourage anybody to look for. We will be putting it up on our Facebook page and on our website too. And we've actually had it on there a couple different times, but her victim impact statement about what the harm meant to her and how it impacted her was just amazing. And after that, she wrote a book called Know My Name. And that was when we learned that it was Chanel Miller. Chanel is an artist and an author, and it is through her art that she continues to heal. She's a poet. She's going to be actually publishing a children's book a couple days after, it actually publishes a couple days after our event. So we're really excited for her to come, because I think her healing journey is something that many people in the audience are going to be able to relate to, the way she used art and the love of her family to overcome, you know, not just the pain of the initial assault, but everything that happened afterwards, including the sentence of 6 months for the man who harmed her.
So Chanel Miller will be your main
Yes.
speaker this year. When is all this going to happen and where?
So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we always host our big Evening of Light and Luncheon of Light events during April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. This year, April 18th, the Evening of Light will be at the Grand River Center in Dubuque for the evening event. Then on the 19th, the following day, we'll be at the Bienvenue in Cedar Falls for the Luncheon of Light event with Chanel as well. And then that night, the 19th, we'll be in Cedar Rapids at the Hotel Kirkwood for our final Evening of Light gala. So it's our traveling road show of galas in a 48-hour period, and it's our biggest fundraiser. And you can find more information on our website. Keep on top of our Facebook page and other social media, and you'll be hearing more and more about this as we get closer.
Has there ever been a case where someone came to you and you did not believe their story?
No, we believe them, and that is something that that's probably the biggest foundational value of Riverview Center is we believe you. Oftentimes when people have experienced trauma, they don't tell their story linearly. Some things seem bigger than maybe they were when they happened. Some things seem smaller. You will tell us your story as you decide to tell us, and we just believe you. And it's a decision that we make, and I talk about this even when I'm just interviewing someone to come on board. You know, thinking and knowing yourself in the way you can know yourself. Do you think you can just decide to believe somebody no matter what? And I found this to be true even when I was hired. It's harder than you think, but it's a beautiful way to live. That someone can say, "I've been harmed," and I just say, "I believe you." It's one of the most powerful things I think we can give to a survivor, is just to automatically say, "I believe you."
So when you're talking to someone and they are telling you their story, you can obviously, in the body language and eye contact, lots of different ways to read somebody. How do you describe their pain as you're listening to it? How does it make you feel?
We talk a lot about that. First off, a lot of people who come into the work that we do are survivors themselves. And some of my staff certainly have disclosed to me or others, and I'm sure some have not. But so a lot of people come to this work with their own stories. And so we make sure that we talk to our staff about taking care of themselves. Sometimes they'll know what kind of story is most triggering to them, and so we'll talk with them about making sure that they have their own coping strategies to navigate through that. You know, we talk self-care has become sort of a cliche term, but we do talk about what is it you need to do to stay healthy while sustaining yourself in this work. And our staff know that, and they know that if they're struggling, they can go to a supervisor. Again, if a staff member comes to me and discloses struggling with a case, I don't tell the rest of the staff. I don't tell anybody who doesn't need to know. I'm as confidential for them as they would be to somebody else. So it takes its toll. We were just on an all-agency training today about human trafficking, which is a subset of our work. And our HR director said to me when we were on a break, she's like, "Gosh, sometimes this is so hard on your heart." And I said, "It is. It is really hard on our heart." But we just have to find ways of making sure we're taking care of ourselves.
As we wrap things up here, Gwen, give me one pitch to our audience here today. What should they do if they know that they are a victim but are afraid to tell anyone?
So I think, what the best thing I can tell you, and I know that this sounds cliche, but come find us. What I would tell people as well, if I can kind of segue as well, is everybody who's listening to this right now knows somebody who's been sexually assaulted or is the victim of domestic abuse. You may not know it yet, but you do. And you want to be the type of person that people will come to and share with you and say, "I've got to tell somebody something and I need some help." What I always tell people is, when someone comes and discloses to you, the first thing to say is, "I believe you and I'm sorry that happened to you." The second thing is to, "Let me get you this phone number. Let's call together," and call Riverview Center. And like I said, even if you find we're not the services that somebody needs, we'll get you where you need to go. If it's mental health servicing, or sometimes people will turn to substances to try to numb the trauma, we'll help you with that too. We'll figure out with you what it is you need and what you want to work on, and we'll get you there. So there is trusted, confidential people out there that you can talk to, and breaking that secret with the perpetrator is the first and best thing you can do to healing.
Gwen, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything
Thank
that
you.
you and Riverview Center and all your dedicated staff does. We're going to have more on the Steel Report. We'll wrap things up here in just a moment. And welcome back as we wrap up this week's program with a reminder that Blackhawk County Sheriff Tony Thompson holds his first book signing about his new book, Any Place But Here. That'll be Saturday morning, 10:30 at the Cedar Falls Public Library on Main Street. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching.